Chapter 40. Now after these things it came about that the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and the baker sinned against their lord the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh grew indignant at his two officers, at the chief of the cupbearers and at the chief of the bakers. So he committed them to the jail of the house of the chief of the bodyguard, to the prison house, the place where Joseph was a prisoner. Then the chief of the bodyguard assigned Joseph to be with them, that he might wait upon them, and they continued in jail for some days. And both of them proceeded to dream a dream, each one his own dream in the one night, each one his dream with its own interpretation, the cupbearer and the baker who belonged to the king of Egypt, who were prisoners in the prison house. When Joseph came into them in the morning and saw them, why, here they were looking dejected. And he began to inquire of the officers of Pharaoh who were with him in the jail of his master's house, saying, For what reason are your faces gloomy today? At this they said to him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter with us. So Joseph said to them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Relate it to me, please. And the chief of the cupbearers went on to relate his dream to Joseph, and to say to him, In my dream, why, here there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 twigs, and it was apparently sprouting shoots. Its blossoms pushed forth, its clusters ripened their grapes, and Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I proceeded to take the grapes and squeeze them out into Pharaoh's cup. After that I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, This is its interpretation. The 3 twigs are 3 days. In 3 days from now, Pharaoh will lift up your head, and he will certainly return you to your office, and you will certainly give Pharaoh's cup into his hand, according to the former custom when you acted as his cupbearer. Nevertheless, you must keep me in your remembrance as soon as it goes well with you, and you must, please, perform loving kindness with me, and mention me to Pharaoh, and you must get me out of this house. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing at all for which they should put me in the prison hole. When the chief of the bakers saw that he had interpreted something good, he in turn said to Joseph, I too was in my dream, and here there were 3 baskets of white bread upon my head, and in the topmost basket there were all sorts of eatables for Pharaoh, the product of a baker, and there were fowls eating them out of the basket on top of my head. Then Joseph answered and said, This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days from now, Pharaoh will lift up your head from off you, and will certainly hang you upon a stake, and the fowls will certainly eat your flesh from off you. Now on the 3rd day it turned out to be Pharaoh's birthday, and he proceeded to make a feast for all his servants, and to lift up the head of the chief of the cupbearers and the head of the chief of the bakers in the midst of his servants. Accordingly, he returned the chief of the cupbearers to his post of cupbearer, and he continued to give the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But the chief of the bakers he hung up, just as Joseph had given them the interpretation. However, the chief of the cupbearers did not remember Joseph, and went on forgetting him. Chapter 41. And it came about at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh was dreaming, and here he was standing by the river Nile. And here, ascending out of the river Nile, were 7 cows, beautiful in appearance and fat-fleshed, and they went feeding among the Nile grass. And here there were 7 other cows ascending after them out of the river Nile, ugly in appearance and thin-fleshed. And they took their stand alongside the cows by the bank of the river Nile. Then the cows that were ugly in appearance and thin-fleshed began to eat up the 7 cows that were beautiful in appearance and fat. At this, Pharaoh woke up. However, he went back to sleep and dreamed a second time. And here there were 7 ears of grain coming up on one stalk, fat and good. And here there were 7 ears of grain, thin and scorched by the east wind, growing up after them. And the thin ears of grain began to swallow up the 7 fat and full ears of grain. At this Pharaoh woke up, and here it was a dream. And it developed in the morning that his spirit became agitated. So he sent and called all the magic-practicing priests of Egypt, and all her wise men. And Pharaoh went on to relate his dreams to them. But there was no interpreter of them for Pharaoh. Then the chief of the cupbearers spoke with Pharaoh, saying, "My sins I am mentioning today." Pharaoh was indignant at his servants. So he committed me to the jail of the house of the chief of the bodyguard, both me and the chief of the bakers. After that, we both dreamed a dream in the one night, both I and he. We dreamed each one his dream with its own interpretation. And there was with us there a young man, a Hebrew, a servant of the chief of the bodyguard. When we related them to him, he proceeded to interpret our dreams to us. He interpreted to each according to his dream. And it turned out that just as he had interpreted to us, so it happened. Me he returned to my office, but him he hanged. And Pharaoh proceeded to send and to call Joseph, that they might bring him quickly from the prison hole. Hence he shaved and changed his mantles, and went in to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I have dreamed a dream, but there is no interpreter of it. Now I myself have heard it said about you that you can hear a dream and interpret it." At this Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, "I need not be considered. God will announce welfare to Pharaoh." And Pharaoh went on to speak to Joseph. "In my dream, here I was standing on the bank of the river Nile. And here, ascending out of the river Nile, were 7 cows, fat-fleshed and beautiful in form. And they began to feed among the Nile grass. And here there were 7 other cows ascending after them, poor and very bad in form and thin-fleshed. For badness I have not seen the like of them in all the land of Egypt. And the skinny and bad cows began to eat up the first 7 fat cows. So these came into their bellies, and yet it could not be known that they had come into their bellies, as their appearance was bad just as at the start. At that I woke up. After that I saw in my dream, and here there were 7 ears of grain coming up on one stalk, full and good. And here there were 7 ears of grain, shriveled, thin, scorched by the east wind, growing up after them. And the thin ears of grain began to swallow up the 7 good ears of grain. So I stated it to the magic-practicing priests, but there was none telling me." Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dream of Pharaoh is but one. What the true God is doing he has told to Pharaoh. The 7 good cows are 7 years. Likewise the 7 good ears of grain are 7 years. The dream is but one. And the 7 skinny and bad cows that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears of grain, scorched by the east wind, will prove to be 7 years of famine. And this is the thing that I have spoken to Pharaoh. What the true God is doing he has caused Pharaoh to see. Here there are 7 years coming with great plenty in all the land of Egypt. But 7 years of famine will certainly arise after them, and all the plenty in the land of Egypt will certainly be forgotten, and the famine will simply consume the land. And the plenty once in the land will not be known as a result of that famine afterward, because it will certainly be very severe. And the fact that the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice means that the thing is firmly established on the part of the true God, and the true God is speeding to do it. So now let Pharaoh look for a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh act and appoint overseers over the land, and he must take up 1/5 of the land of Egypt during the 7 years of plenty. And let them collect all the foodstuffs of these coming good years, and let them pile up grain under Pharaoh's hand as foodstuffs in the cities, and they must safeguard it. And the foodstuffs must serve as a supply for the land for the 7 famine years which will develop in the land of Egypt, in order that the land may not be cut off by the famine. Well, the thing proved to be good in the eyes of Pharaoh and of all his servants. So Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can another man be found like this one, in whom the Spirit of God is?" After that Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has caused you to know all this, there is no one as discreet and wise as you are. You will personally be over my house, and all my people will obey you implicitly. Only as to the throne shall I be greater than you." And Pharaoh added to Joseph, "See, I do place you over all the land of Egypt." With that, Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his own hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and clothed him with garments of fine linen, and placed a necklace of gold about his neck. Moreover, he had him ride in the 2nd chariot of honor that he had, so that they should call out ahead of him, "Avrek!" thus putting him over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh further said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your authorization no man may lift up his hand or his foot in all the land of Egypt." After that, Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphenath-Paneah, and gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On, as a wife. And Joseph began to go out over the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Then Joseph went out from before Pharaoh, and toured about in all the land of Egypt. And during the 7 years of plenty, the land went on producing by the handfuls. And he kept collecting all the foodstuffs of the 7 years that came upon the land of Egypt, and he would put the foodstuffs in the cities. The foodstuffs of the field that was round about a city he put in the midst of it. And Joseph continued piling up grain in very great quantity, like the sand of the sea, until finally they gave up counting it, because it was without number. And before the year of the famine arrived, there were born to Joseph 2 sons, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On, bore to him. So Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, because, to quote him, "God has made me forget all my trouble and all the house of my father." And the name of the second he called Ephraim, because, to quote him, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my wretchedness." And the 7 years of the plenty that had obtained in the land of Egypt gradually ended. And, in turn, the 7 years of the famine started to come, just as Joseph had said. And the famine developed in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was found bread. Finally, all the land of Egypt became famished, and the people began to cry to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, you are to do." And the famine obtained over all the surface of the earth. Then Joseph began to open up all the grain depositories that were among them, and to sell to the Egyptians, as the famine got a strong grip on the land of Egypt. Moreover, people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy from Joseph, because the famine had a strong grip on all the earth.